On the morning of July 30th, 2016, firefighters pushed through the front door of a burned house on Cleara Street in Cleveland, expecting smoke damage and maybe an empty interior. Instead, they walked into a living room that felt arranged, not wrecked, where bodies were placed upright like someone wanted them seen. The air carried gasoline mixed with something heavier, and on the wall behind them sat the words, "No snitchin'," written large enough to catch attention before anything else. One survivor was still inside, hidden the entire time, too shaken to speak when they first pulled her out. That was the house when it was over, quiet, burned, and holding answers nobody wanted to hear. But the hours before that moment, the decisions that led there looked very different. To understand how a house in Cleveland could become that kind of crime scene, you have to understand the city beneath the headlines. Cleveland sits on Lake Erie with museums, sports teams, rock history, old factories, Polish churches, immigrant blocks, and streets that still carry the weight of jobs disappearing over decades. That mix gave the city pride, but it also left certain areas with broken schools, empty lots, drug corners, crews fighting over names, and young men chasing status before they even understood the cost. By the early 2010s, Cleveland was not dealing with one giant gang controlling everything like a movie script. It was dealing with smaller sets, loose alliances, prison-born groups, Chicago-connected names, and neighborhood crews moving like separate fires across the map. That fragmentation made everything harder to read, since one block could belong to a local clique, while another block carried the flag of a bigger national brand. Chicago influence had already reached Cleveland through names like the Gangster Disciples, while homegrown groups such as the Heartless Felons had built their own reputation through detention centers, prison yards, carjackings, robberies, and street discipline. Younger crews were coming up under that pressure, learning that a name only mattered when people feared it, which made reputation feel like currency. In that kind of setup, a teenager with a gun, a phone camera, and a few older homies behind him could make a whole neighborhood move differently. One of the clearest examples was BBE 900, also known as Band Boys Enterprise 900, which came out of the West 90th Street and Madison Avenue area. The crew became known around 2013 and 2014 among teenagers and young adults posting rap videos, flashing guns, showing money, throwing signs, and turning the internet into a billboard for street pressure. Prosecutors later hit alleged members with a massive 299 count indictment in October 2014, targeting dozens of people. That case mattered in Cleveland because it showed how the new generation was not just committing crimes quietly. They were branding the whole thing for clicks, fear, recruitment, and street credibility. The violence tied to crews like BBE 900 was not limited to enemies hiding on back streets. Reports from that period described attacks in parks, robberies near transit spots, beatings in busy streets, and teenagers saying crew names out loud while pressing victims. That detail is important since it shows how the street politics had started bleeding into everyday movement, where catching a bus, walking through a park, or standing near the wrong group could turn dangerous. For civilians, it meant the line between gang business and normal life kept getting thinner, which made silence feel safer than honesty. On the east side, groups like OTZ, short for Only the Zone, gave the city another version of the same problem. OTZ was described as a younger faction tied to Gangster Disciple influence, with members mostly around 15 to 17 moving fast through robberies, assaults, stolen vehicles, and suburban stick-ups. People online even tracked their alleged spree like a map, which showed how much attention these young crews were pulling from regular residents. They called themselves the Pull-Up Gang in some accounts, which fit the style of quick attacks, stolen rides, sudden pressure, and victims chosen more for opportunity than personal history. Then there were the Heartless Felons, a group with deeper roots and a heavier name in Cleveland street culture. Unlike some younger crews built mostly around music and social media heat, the Heartless Felons had history inside youth facilities. Their name carried weight in carjackings, drug markets, robberies, kidnappings, and violent enforcement, which made younger crews treat them like a blueprint. When people in Cleveland talked about serious street groups during that period, the Heartless Felons were usually somewhere in the conversation. The cutthroat gang showed another side of the city's underworld, since authorities described it as more structured, with titles like Godfather, Underboss, and Lieutenant. Some groups had rules, punishment systems, colors, tattoos, territory, money flows, and chains of command that made them look closer to organized crime. When prosecutors targeted cutthroat members around East 105th and Superior Avenue in 2015, they were not only chasing individual shooters, they were trying to break a whole structure. That pattern kept repeating through Jay Park, Lakeview, 2 Lock, La Flexico, Fully Blooded Felons, and other crews that surfaced in indictments over the next several years. Each group had its own name, its own block, its own enemies, and its own way of proving power. But the engine behind the violence stayed familiar. A shooting could raise status, a robbery could bring money, a beating could enforce discipline, and a rumor about snitching could put somebody on a list. The streets were not moving randomly, even when the results looked chaotic from the outside. Inside that larger picture, the Gangster Disciples moved with a different kind of reputation, one that did not always need the loudest music video or the wildest public stunt. The GD name came with Chicago history, folk nation identity, 6-pointed stars, rules, ranks, governors, board members, street codes, and a heavy no-snitch culture that could travel across state lines. In Cleveland, that presence blended with local crews, prison networks, drug markets, and younger sets looking for backing from something bigger than their own corner. That connection made the GD influence harder to separate from the rest of the city's gang web. What made the GD presence more dangerous in this story was the structure behind it, since discipline can sometimes do more damage than chaos. A loose crew might shoot from emotion, but a structured clique can turn suspicion into a decision, then turn that decision into an example for everybody watching. By the time Cleveland's opioid trade, fentanyl money, police pressure, and street paranoia started colliding, the wrong rumor could move through that system like a match in dry grass. That is the world the Johnson house sat inside, and that is why what happened later did not come from nowhere. By the time Cleveland detectives started connecting scattered violence across the east side, a quieter group had already been moving with purpose under the Gangster Disciples name. This was not a crew built from teenagers chasing attention online, since these were mid-level members trusted with responsibility inside a larger structure. Their jobs centered on collecting drug debts, resolving disputes between members, and making sure nobody stepped outside the code that kept the organization intact. People around the neighborhoods did not always see them openly, yet their presence could be felt whenever conflicts ended quickly without public noise. Within that circle, names started surfacing through interviews, street talk, and later court discussions, though nobody ever confirmed a single leader standing at the top. Robert Allen, known on the street as Lil Capone, was often mentioned as a key figure who moved with authority during meetings and decisions. Derek Harrison, known as Fats, carried a reputation tied to enforcement, with people saying he handled situations when others hesitated. D'Angelo Jones, called D-Bone, was described by some associates as someone who understood how to apply pressure without drawing unnecessary attention. None of them acted alone in the open, since decisions were believed to connect back to a higher chain, sometimes reaching beyond Cleveland into Chicago-based leadership that approved serious actions. As that structure settled into Cleveland's East Side drug scene around 2015 and 2016, law enforcement pressure began tightening across multiple crews. Federal investigations into gangs like the Heartless Felons and Fully Blooded Felons started producing indictments, raids, and arrests that made movement riskier. Police and FBI task forces increased surveillance on suspected stash houses, wiretaps picked up conversations, and prosecutors began building cases using conspiracy charges similar to RICO statutes. With that level of attention, anyone getting picked up by the police created immediate concern, especially when charges did not stick the way others expected. That shift made internal trust fragile, since even small inconsistencies could raise serious questions. Inside the GD-linked circle, conversations reportedly started turning toward one name that did not carry much weight before. Marcus Johnson, sometimes referred to as Mo in discussions tied to later court records, was not a major figure in Cleveland's drug trade. He operated at a lower level, moving product in small quantities, staying close to his block, and living with family members in a two-story house on Cleara Street. His life did not suggest leadership or power, yet one moment changed to how others looked at him. After being arrested on a possession charge, he was released quickly, which stood out in a climate where others were facing heavy sentences. That quick release created a chain reaction in conversations across the group, where speculation replaced facts without much resistance. People started saying he must have been cooperating, even though nobody could point to solid proof that he had given information. The phrase "he talking" began circulating quietly, moving from one discussion to another until it settled like truth in certain minds. Once that label stuck, it did not take long before his name moved from suspicion into something more serious. As those concerns grew, the enforcers began discussing what needed to be done, though those conversations were not framed around territory disputes or lost money. The focus turned toward maintaining control and sending a signal that could not be ignored by anyone connected to the network. References to past punishments came up, including cases from other states where suspected informants were handled with extreme violence to discourage others. By the time multiple voices aligned around the same idea, the situation had moved past debate into planning. That planning did not look rushed or emotional, since it followed a structure that matched how the group handled serious matters. According to later testimony, several individuals were involved in organizing transportation, selecting timing, and preparing equipment needed for the operation. Multiple vehicles were arranged to move participants without drawing attention to a single car, while masks and gloves were prepared to reduce identification risks. Firearms were chosen based on availability, with both handguns and at least one long weapon mentioned in accounts tied to the case. Each step suggested intention rather than impulse, which made the coming event more calculated than spontaneous. The objective went beyond removing one person suspected of cooperating, since the conversations emphasized making an example that others would not forget. That mindset meant the target was not only Marcus Johnson, but also the environment around him, including anyone connected to his household. The house itself became part of the plan, serving as a location where control could be established and maintained for as long as necessary. By structuring the approach that way, the group ensured that whatever happened inside would carry a message reaching beyond that address. Once those elements were in place, the decision crossed a point where turning back no longer felt like an option. On the evening of July 29, 2016, according to records presented during prosecution, the final steps of that plan began moving into action. Several cars approached the Cleara Street location as daylight started fading, which reduced visibility while still allowing clear movement. Individuals wearing masks and gloves, already prepared for what was about to unfold. The timing, positioning, and entry suggested coordination that matched earlier discussions, showing that the plan had been followed closely. By the time the door was forced open, the shift from planning to execution had already been locked in. By the time the vehicle stopped along Cleara Street on July 29, 2016, The plan had already moved beyond discussion into execution with timing that matched earlier coordination. The Johnson family had settled into a quiet evening, unaware that several armed men were stepping out of cars and moving toward their front door with purpose. Witness accounts later described a loud impact as the door was forced open, followed by voices shouting commands that filled the house before anyone inside could react properly. Marcus Johnson, his girlfriend, his mother, his younger brother, and 2 cousins were caught in that moment, pulled from separate rooms into a single space where movement became controlled. The intruders moved quickly to gather everyone into the living room, establishing control within minutes through weapons, positioning, and clear direction that no one inside could challenge. Once everyone had been forced together, the focus narrowed onto Marcus Johnson, who was already being treated differently before any explanation was offered to others in the room. One of the men, later identified in testimony as Robert Allen, stepped forward and made the accusation directly, using words that left no room for interpretation. Johnson tried to respond, though witnesses later said his words did not change how the group approached him, since the decision had already been made before they arrived. What followed did not begin as immediate execution, since the violence started in stages, building from physical control into something far more deliberate. The first phase involved physical assault meant to break resistance, with Johnson being struck repeatedly using fists and the handles of firearms. Each strike reinforced the accusation, while the others in the room were forced to watch, making it clear that this situation extended beyond a single individual. His girlfriend attempted to intervene at one point, though she was pushed back and restrained along with the others, preventing any disruption to what was unfolding. The younger members of the family, including a 10-year-old boy, were held in place, witnessing everything while unable to move or speak freely. That shift turned the scene from targeted punishment into a controlled environment where fear could be applied across multiple people at once. As time moved forward, the violence escalated in a way that showed no urgency to finish quickly, which set this event apart from typical street shootings or robberies. Johnson was shot in the kneecaps during one phase, a detail later confirmed through medical examination, leaving him unable to stand while still conscious. Additional gunshots followed, striking his shoulders, prolonging the suffering while ensuring he remained aware of what was happening around him. The others were not spared from involvement, since his girlfriend was subjected to physical assault while being forced to remain in the same space. That approach extended the punishment beyond Johnson himself, turning his family into part of the message that was being constructed in real time. During these hours, control remained constant, with the group maintaining their positions and reinforcing authority through both words and actions. At one point, according to testimony presented later in court, a phone call was placed on speaker, connecting the scene to a higher authority believed to be outside Cleveland. The call allowed that voice to hear what was happening, with responses that indicated approval rather than hesitation. The men inside the house responded to that approval by continuing without interruption, making the situation feel even more structured to those witnessing it, since accounts describe photos being taken during the process, capturing images intended to serve as evidence of what had been done. Conversations included references to sharing those images later, either within private circles or potentially beyond, depending on how the message needed to spread. The language used during these moments focused on ensuring that anyone considering cooperation with law enforcement would understand the consequences. By documenting the scene, the group ensured that the impact would not remain confined to that house alone. That step turned the event into something designed to travel beyond its physical location. As the night continued, the violence shifted from prolonged punishment into a series of executions that followed a controlled sequence rather than chaotic bursts. Johnson's girlfriend was forced into position first, with witnesses later describing her being made to kneel before a gunshot ended her life. His mother, who had pleaded for mercy earlier, was shot in the chest, adding to the pattern of deliberate actions that defined the scene. The younger brother, despite being initially spared from direct physical assault, was ultimately shot as well, leaving no one in the immediate group untouched by the final stage. Each act followed the same pattern of control, positioning, and execution, reinforcing the structure that had been present from the beginning. Johnson himself remained alive through much of this process, which intensified the psychological impact intended by those carrying it out. His final moments came after witnessing the deaths of those around him. The execution of each victim was not rushed, since the group maintained their pace, ensuring that every action aligned with the message they intended to send. That message centered on punishment for perceived cooperation, delivered in a way that would resonate far beyond the individuals involved. By the time the final shot was fired, the room had been transformed into a space shaped by intention rather than disorder. After the executions were completed, the group moved into a final phase that focused on staging the scene before leaving the location. Bodies were arranged in the living room, placed upright on furniture in a way that appeared unnatural to those who later entered the space. A six-pointed star was marked on the wall along with the words, "No Snitchin," connecting the scene to the Gangster Disciples' identity and reinforcing the reason behind the violence. Gasoline was then spread across parts of the room, preparing for an attempt to destroy evidence through fire. The decision to burn the house suggested a desire to erase physical traces while leaving behind enough of a message to be recognized. The fire that followed did not fully consume the scene, which became a critical detail once responders arrived the next morning. Flames damaged parts of the structure, though key elements remained intact, including the arrangement of bodies and markings on the walls. Neighbors reported smelling smoke before calling emergency services, leading firefighters to the location without immediate knowledge of what waited inside. When crews entered, they encountered a scene that combined fire damage with clear signs of violent activity, creating confusion during initial assessments. That partial destruction allowed investigators to gather evidence that might have been lost if the fire had spread further. While the main events unfolded in the living room, one person remained hidden throughout the night, avoiding detection by staying inside a closet. A 12-year-old cousin of Marcus Johnson had moved there during the initial invasion, reacting to the chaos by finding a space where she could remain out of sight. She stayed silent as everything unfolded, hearing voices, gunshots, and movements without being discovered by those inside the house. Her survival depended on that decision, since she avoided becoming part of the violence that consumed the rest of the household. By the time responders arrived, she emerged as the only direct witness to what had taken place. When firefighters discovered her, she was described as shaken, covered in soot, and struggling to communicate what she had experienced. Initial statements capture only fragments, with repeated phrases about accusations and violence that matched the scene around her. Authorities quickly recognized her importance as a witness, placing her into protective custody due to the risks associated with her knowledge. Her account later became central to understanding the sequence of events, providing details that physical evidence alone could not fully explain. Through her testimony, investigators were able to connect actions, voices, and timing into a clearer narrative of what had happened inside the house. The events of that night did not remain confined to Cleara Street, as news spread quickly through Cleveland once details began emerging. Rumors circulated online, with some claiming that images from the scene had been shared within certain circles, though law enforcement did not confirm those reports publicly. The phrase, "No Snitchin," attached to the case became widely recognized, reinforcing the message that had been intended from the start. Community reactions ranged from fear to anger, with many struggling to process how such an event could take place within a residential neighborhood. That reaction set the stage for the investigation that followed, where the focus shifted from what happened to who was responsible. When firefighters pulled back from the Cleara Street house that morning, they already knew they were standing inside something far beyond a typical fire response. Police arriving shortly after began piecing together what the flames had failed to hide, noticing the arrangement of bodies, the markings on the wall, and the scale of violence contained in one space. News spread quickly across Cleveland's east side, moving through neighborhoods, social media, and word of mouth, with people reacting in disbelief at how extreme the scene had been. Rumors returned almost immediately, with some pointing toward the Gangster Disciples, while others speculated about rival crews or outside involvement, which only added to the tension building across the city. That fear settled deeper into the community, since residents understood that whoever carried this out had no hesitation in bringing that level of violence into a family home. Within days, law enforcement formed a joint task force that included the Cleveland Division of Police, the FBI, and prosecutors from Cuyahoga County, focusing on identifying those responsible through coordinated investigation. Detectives executed search warrants across multiple East Side locations, collecting phones, clothing, shell casings, and other physical evidence tied to the Cleara Street scene. Ballistics analysis connected recovered weapons to the shootings inside the house, while digital evidence from seized phones revealed conversations that aligned with the timeline of events. The surviving 12-year-old witness was placed under strict protection, moved away from the area, and interviewed carefully to preserve her account without exposing her to further risk. That combination of physical evidence and testimony allowed investigators to move from speculation into targeted action. As the case developed, wiretaps and informants began filling gaps that physical evidence alone could not explain, bringing names like Robert Allen, Derek Harrison, and D'Angelo Jones into focus. Arrests followed in stages, with suspects taken into custody based on their roles, connections, and statements captured during the investigation. Authorities also uncovered links between those individuals and other criminal activities across Cleveland, including drug distribution and violent enforcement tied to gang operations. Each new detail strengthened the case, showing that the Cleara Street murders were not isolated but connected to a broader structure operating within the city. By the time indictments were filed in March 2017, prosecutors had built a narrative centered on organized punishment rather than random violence. During the courtroom phase, charges included aggravated murder, kidnapping, aggravated arson, and participation in a criminal gang, reflecting the full scope of what occurred that night. Defense attorneys challenged the credibility of witnesses, focusing on inconsistencies and the background of those cooperating with law enforcement. Despite those efforts, the testimony of the surviving child remained central, supported by forensic evidence and recorded communications presented to the jury. Graphic photographs, ballistic reports, and call transcripts were introduced to demonstrate how control, planning, and execution had unfolded over several hours. Prosecutors framed the case as a deliberate act meant to enforce silence, which aligned with the evidence shown throughout the trial. When the verdict was delivered, key figures, including Robert Allen, Derek Harrison, and D'Angelo Jones, received life sentences without the possibility of parole, removing them permanently from the streets. Other defendants involved in lesser roles received sentences ranging from 15 to 25 years, reflecting their level of participation. Those outcomes closed the legal chapter of the case, though the impact on the community extended beyond the courtroom. The Cleara Street house remained standing as a reminder, no longer just a crime scene, but a symbol of how far that system could go when unchecked. What happened inside that house exposed a structure that still exists, showing that While the method used that night was extreme, the mindset behind it was not rare, and the story did not begin there or end with those sentences.